tower was built. He was a copper for many years, and that career led to his becoming a paralegal. He is a skilled sailor with all things boating, and that's why I have so enjoyed sailing with both of them. I have total confidence in their skills and abilities. And Sally and Noel work hard in the winter so they can sail somewhere in the summer. They haven't decided yet this summer where they're going or whether they're going. So we'll have to keep an ear to the ground for that. So Sally's going to begin with a little bit about a trip on the Shannon River.
So you do the computer. Okay, so the weather was vile, and we couldn't, if we launched, we couldn't have got out the river, around the headland, and into a harbour where we could leave the boat for 10 days, while we went to play on another boat for 10 days. So we just left it on the hard for 10 days, because that was what worked. And so the boat is up this river system here, and we would have had to come around that headland and then tie up because there's no dockage at the boatyard that we're at. So we went on the River Shannon, and we got to join on the Shannon next to keep the pictures going. We have too many pictures, so we got the train out there, and do you see the little boat, the Red Seal? It's 26 with a lifting keel, and there were 4 of us on that, and we laughed our heads off for 10 days. And so Carol would sit in the companionway, and she has horrible arthritis, and it took 3 years to get this trip going.
But she's the cruise director too, you know.
Oh my goodness. We ate our way through Ireland.
Because we're 2 navigators trying to find where we're going.
And you had to keep changing the marks, because if you turned up the creek, because we went up the River Suck for a bit, then suddenly the marks went on the other side. If you go between things, you're generally all right. But we had a lovely time, and we're just going to show you these quickly, even though they're not Scotland, if that's okay. Because it was all part of the summer.
This lock, this was the first one we got into. And we got up, we're waiting for the lock to open, and it didn't, and it didn't, and it didn't. Then the lock keeper came out and said, don't know when, Swan flew into a hydro transformer and killed the power for that whole part of Ireland. So for dinner, somebody had roast swan.
How was it? We didn't get it.
And this is the fields on the side are referred to as the callows of the Shannon. And even though it's wet and boggy, the cattle gain weight at a terrifically fast rate because it's all such rich grass. But it's only for grazing. Oh, it was lovely. And it was the most perfect boat to do it in.
Well, it could have been a little bigger.
Our problem was we had big boat stuff. We had our big boat rain gear and big boat boots. And so you brought the little tiny roll-up wind pants and running shoes because it was you couldn't store all the stuff. But it was a beautiful part of Ireland. Dry dock.
That was a drying out dock up in the basement.
They spent 7 weeks on this trip and had a ball, and Carol couldn't keep track of which day was what because she was just having too much fun.
What month is this?
June.
June. Who spoke?
John and Carol Gibbon, my Aunt Barbara's little sister and her husband.
And they equipped their boat because they traveled with us quite a bit. John bought the Seal, and of course the first thing he did was put in a new beta engine. The second thing, well, the first thing he put in a new gas cooker because we got his old gas cooker because it was too big for the Seal. Put a beta engine in, and then the next thing he did was put an S-bar diesel furnace in it. So it's just a smaller version of ours. And I can't convince him to change color.
But it was a fun trip. I can't see the picture unless I look at this. It went through Athlone, and we like geocaching, and there was a geocache so close, but then we wanted to get on. That's the inside. Okay, John's in the head. The thing beside my knee is the casing for the lifting keel. And you had to tangle to get into the V-berth. But once you got into the V-berth, it was bigger than ours.
You were there for the night.
Con McNoyce I learned about in school with the history of art. And it was terrific to go there. And it was wildly windy, and it was naturally isolated just by all the flooding lands around it.
It's one of the big religious sites in Ireland.
Applesauce or mustard or?
Pardon?
Keep going.
This was the entrance to the women's chapel on the site. They never got it finished.
He's geocaching and not doing the first thing that comes to mind. And it was a
That's
flood
actually
gauge.
a flood gauge on the wall. See, I kept Sally happy.
And there was a sunny day that day. I was able to keep my hat on.
What time of year was this?
June.
June.
It was a very wet June, and that was, the weather had set up, we couldn't have gotten out.
Ireland.
You might just explain what geocaching is?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're given, geocaching is a bit like sailboat racing. You can invest an awful lot of time for very little visible reward, but you have great fun. It's a hide and seek, and you've got a latitude and a longitude and a clue. And it's usually somewhere of history or local significance, like the rain gauge, the floodwater gauge. And something will be hidden there, and you put in your secret name, which is our boat name, we have no imagination. But you put in your code name, and then you log it on the computer.
Yeah, it's like a treasure hunt for adults or even kids, and it just gets you to places where you wouldn't go normally. There's about 7 million of them around the world.
And it's just kind of fun. This was, we stopped for lunch and drove the bow into the reeds, and there was still 2 meters of water under the keel, and there was no way it was moving. And this is in County Offaly, Clonfert Cathedral?
Yeah.
Yes.
Sure you got that right?
No. I'm close. I think it's Clonfert, and it's where St. Brendan's buried.
And he's right there.
And this was Banner where we ended it. But then we drove back, and this is Burr, and that's a telescope here.
And, well, you can just read it there, but the telescope was restored and they still use it, and it's just an amazing piece of equipment. That's a telescope.
A very early one.
I think that was built early 1800s. And that's the end of that.
Okay, so then, now we're getting on our boat.
That's the day after we arrived in Ireland. Went to the boatyard, and they hadn't quite got the staircase right into position yet, so we had to use a ladder. You're doing what? And then, of course, there's always the repairs, so we got the trusty little sewing machine, that I picked over the garbage here, and put the tarp back together. And then dried it on Sally's brother's back lawn. Getting in the water. Shorts, that was one of the 3 days of the summer. Going down the Barrow River, and they're putting in a new bridge to bypass the town of New Ross. And it's going to be, and New Ross is a seaport, so it has to be high enough to let boats like this get underneath it. This is just down the river in Waterford in one of the sailing cruise ships. The boat Sally's on is a trawler that the two boys who bought the boatyard, they bought the boatyard so they'd have a place to keep that boat, because they were tired of paying big money at marinas and stuff. So, yeah, and and we weren't sure what they were trying to do with this one. There was one tug going one way and the other one going the other way to get it into the river. Downtown Dublin. And that's an actual window instead of a poster. And Sally wouldn't let me go in.
He left his Visa card behind me.
And we went off to the museum. It was the weather was crappy, and that was this was a 7-foot tall Viking that they dug up, and he was killed. Somebody either hit him with a sword or an axe on the side of his head and peeled part of his skull off. And the other picture just before that was what happens if you diet too much. And I'm not going to repeat what's on there. You can all read that one.
Straight as a carpenter. That's like Noel.
I was told to smile for the picture, so I did.
Looks like a Harding man.
And then we went up the Irish coast, crossed the Stranraer, which is down at the bottom. Anyway, we crossed the Scotland down in the corner, and then we went up and wound up into Glasgow with on the way up we went into Rossley. Okay.
Okay, but leaving Stranraer,
Yeah, we were leaving, trying to get out of Stranraer, and the weather was fine, no wind, but down at the end of the loch where we were, it was blowing about 35 knots with gusts, and I tried to back out of the slip. The boat wouldn't turn either direction, so when we got blowing sideways down into the bottom of the slip, up against the main pier, and to get off of that, we needed to get help to warp us around the note, and then once we got the bow around, we were able to mow the rope. But doing that, we caught the bottom of the motor on a ladder, which bent the motor mount that was hanging out on the rail. So when we got up into I forget the name of the town, but we went in from Marina and met friends. And I tried to get the old board off, but one of the clamp screws was seized solid, so that's what I was doing there. I got the big crescent wrench out and a hammer, proceeded to break the bolt, and then I was able to get enough of it to get it off, and I had to use a torch on it to finally get the thing apart, and then made it so I could use it again. But we went off across to Rossley, and into the marina. We were, I think, on the third upper finger. From there, this guy did it on purpose, just to dry the boat and do his property. Lines caught in it. Yeah. and the Rothsey Castle. It was, and we're going up into the Clyde and Glasgow, but this was the start of Greenock, where they're still building ships, and then the whole river was called Clydebank, and the whole thing was industrial right up into Glasgow with all kinds of different shipyards. One of the big cranes that they turned into a tourist attraction, so you can go up in there in an elevator and get the view from the top. That's the Marine Museum, or the Transportation Museum in Glasgow. We were going to go into that little marina because the guidebook said there was one. Then we looked, there wasn't any place anyway, and there was no water. So we kept going up into the river. Past, this is the Glen Lee, which was a clipper ship built right there. Went off around the world, then was bought by the Spanish and used as a training ship. They abandoned it in the river in Seville. The museum, or group of people from Glasgow, went and bought it from the Spanish and brought it back up here and rebuilt it. Now that's us at the end of a free pier in Glasgow. And when Dianne joined us, she couldn't find us there. And it was dead easy. You just look and there we were, the only boat there. That's kind of the history of the ship. And they've done a nice job of the restoration on it. It'll never go back to sea, of course, but you can get a feel for it there at the museum.
When was it built?
1898.
Yeah.
1898,
First class accommodations.
and the local Sea Cadet Corps get to use it as a training ground. So it's perfect.
Now the upper is the generator for the ship, and the lower was one of the main engines. It had 2 engines put into it by the Spanish, I believe.
Now
Yeah.
that's how Dianne couldn't find us. Can you see the Canadian flag there? We got the green sail cover on the jib. That was what she was trying to find. We said, we'll go to the Glen Lee, look up and look up river. We're right close.
Which I did, and I still didn't see it.
And then she found us.
Yeah. It was tourist class on Kalinka 1.
Yes, that's me.
Oh.
It was pretty good.
So they've got in Glasgow all these lovely names for their architecture, and this they call the Armadillo, I think. It's great fun. So this was just upriver and on the other side, about half a kilometer away. That's important later.
And this is the Waverley, which
Is steam.
steam powered. So Paul, you'd know how to run that. And it came, it was a quarter mile, I guess, to where we were. And we guessed its speed at 9 knots coming here.
Oh, no.
No,
Wait for it. There's no sound.
well, there's no sound. Anyway,
It was.
as it went by, Sally went below, looked on the AIS, and it went by us at 10.7 knots.
And
And it was still gaining speed.
And it had less than a full mile to get up to that speed. And you see why we couldn't figure out how Dianne couldn't see us?
I was standing on the bow of the ship of the Glen Lee, trying to find them.
You should have waved.
Yeah, I should have went.
Now, inside the Transportation Museum, those aren't models, they're real cars and motorcycles, and they stuck them up on the wall. So it looks like some kid's collection of Matchbox toys. And we were talking, Elspeth's cousin was our personal guide, and he was saying that they often catch people up by the cars, and they caught one guy underneath one of the cars taking a part off, because he wanted for the one he had at home. And he said, and then there was another guy who said, we come up, and the guy came down and started to complain to them that there was no safety rails up there. You know, go figure. But the subway was originally cable driven, so that's one of the big, I guess, one end of it, where it would pull it one way and then there'd be a motor at the other end to pull it back. And this is the display case for their model ships, and this thing is on a big track, so if you stand in one place, all the models will come around so you can get to see them rather than have you walk around and get some exercise.
This is what they call the Ides of Bute. And so you go down the Clyde, you've got Bute Island, and you go up and around it. And the current is, we're going at the most benign time that we can go. We've done the tide times, we figured it out, and this is the most slack time that we can go through it. And then even the markers are hollow, because the water rise and fall is so sudden. The sluice is just incredible. And there was no wind.
And we had 2 knots against us at slack.
It was very pretty.
Just
How long a stretch?
6 marks.
yeah. So half
It wasn't
mile.
long, but it was, and all the books said you must do it. But here's how and when.
So we did as we were told.
And this was out the other side.
Came out of there, and then we went down to Tarbert. Tarbert has kind of an interesting history. This is Tarbert, and then there's a West Tarbert, and there's a stretch going through the valley there that I think is maybe 6 miles through. And there's the Scottish king and the Viking king, Magnus Hairy Legs. And Fair Legs. And he got that name because he wore a kilt. But anyway, they were arguing, or having a couple of drinks, and the Scottish king said, look, whatever land you can get your boat around, I will give to you. And figuring that the Viking was a dumb guy and would be able to get around anything. But Magnus put one over on the Scots guy. He got his crew, and they dragged their ship across the isthmus. And with that, then Magnus was given all of northern Scotland. So, friends of ours, Dave and Don, who we had met 2 years ago, up in, met Don first up in Tobermory, and then we met them both again when we were coming back to Ireland in the Crinan Canal, when we literally ran into the back of their boat. We were in the canal, they went in front of us, we came in behind them. I was tying up on a wall when a big powerboat came in behind me and tried to go between me and the wall with his bow, and then which shoved us forward into the back of the other boat.
There was very little information about this, but the first lock held 4 boats, and the second lock held 2. And the young fella that was the lock keeper was 15 and a high school student and hadn't a clue. And anybody with a little bit of gray hair intimidated him, and I said, you gotta tell us we can't see from down here that it's a half-size lock to the previous one. This is counting now.
So we became close friends with them, and then we met them again this past summer. We were in contact with them on radio and email, and we met up with them in Tarbert, and then we spent most of the summer sailing with them. But David had, the winter before, had a bleed on his brain, and they didn't think he was going to live. And if he did, they thought he was going to be a vegetable, but he woke up and he's just as miserable as he was before. So
We tried to go into Campbelltown to get fuel, and the tie-up was horrible. It's great if you're commercial, but we're not. So we went on, and the weather was perfect. It was meant to be that we went around the Mullakintar that day, and again, it's the weather and the tides.
Yeah, we went with the tide, and it was one of the few times we could actually have a nice sail too.
That's what you
Mullen can fire.
Mm-hmm.
Mullakintar and Belfast.
No.
You can see one from there.
But that's the tide started to make up, so the race, in another hour, we wouldn't have been able to go through that. And the tides are such that you go with them, and we can run actually from Belfast right down to Dublin on one set of tides, and that's 98 miles. And going north to do the opposite. We went around the corner onto the island of Gia, where we've been 2 or 3 times. And this is the most boats that have been there. They put in another 15 mooring balls. White sand bottom, sand beaches. Sally doing her crew drop. That's overlooking the harbor. At the boathouse where we had Sally's birthday dinner. And that's what you do with old boots in Scotland.
And the island of Gia is fascinating. It's a microclimate. It's cooperatively owned by all the residents. They purchased it from the laird. And so they're having to sort out county council housing and owned housing. And it's a fun place, and they just figure out solutions.
Anyway, that previous picture was, we met other friends of ours, Tony and Ann, and that's one of the standing stones on Gia.
The giant
And everybody not sure why they did it, and I just think people with a sense of humor stuck them up there for people in the future would ask what they were doing there. That's called Giant's Tooth. We rented bicycles and went up to the north of the island. On the way back, I managed to fall off into the ditch, but survived. In Ireland, for some reason, they don't put roofs on their churches. But they don't look. No roof. Scotland, yeah. Well, they don't do it in Ireland either. Sally's birthday dinner.
So this is in the little boat shed that was across that you saw from the picture. And we happened to eat in the 2 most beautiful restaurants according to this cruising guide. And it was lovely.
So we left Gia, had a nice sail north, and we went up into Ardfern. And this is one of the castles on the way in. When first we were going up to Tavish, we couldn't get in there. The place was full, so we went up a little farther in the loch to a place called the Fairy Islands.
That's a picture of the previous job.
And anchored up in the inside there.
Oops, sorry. Wanna go back?
Yeah, I don't know if this will work. Where? Does it work?
Do you see the one anchor on the picture?
I can't see.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, we went up there.
That's very tall.
And then we put Dianne to work making bread.
Obviously, she was having fun. Oh, yeah.
And then had dinner. Some of the local residents sunbathing. from here, we went around to Iron Fern. What, I did it wrong again? Nice quiet day.
At low tide, your real estate increases.
Yeah. The check is get big.
Okay. Princess Anne's boat,
Yeah.
her new boat.
New boat. 46-foot brushwood.
Eating features a lot. And this was the morning we left the quarry back.
Yeah, we left, there's up to the quarry back, and there's a body of water that has some awful currents when the tides are running, and the British Navy takes their submarines up in there, so that they can learn not to bump into the rocks and stuff and deal with heavy tides and currents. And it's another place where you go through with slack water. Downtown Oban, and those two are prepared for anything. Well, this is a bus trip, I guess, over to.
We did. Okay,
I can't see.
we went here, look, you click it. We went by bus to the island of Iona. And so you had to go from Oban by ferry to Mull, from that harbor across the bottom end of Mull, which is quite a big island, to Iona. And we got a small boat ride to Staffa. And the reason we did this was the forecast was for 60 knots of wind. So we did that, and to the detriment of this boat. They had two of these boats, twin engines, and it bounced off the slipway coming in on its drive unit. This was Staffa, and everybody was sick except Noel and Dianne.
It was blowing 55 knots when we were over in this boat, and probably shouldn't have gone, but we went because if they get you there, they don't give you a refund.
So
They
we've
got us
seen,
there, so we had to pay the full fare.
we've seen the same rock formation in Labrador and Henley Harbor,
And
Giant's Causeway, Northern Ireland, and now across at Staffa.
the same rock formations in Norway.
Basalt, hexagonal columns.
And the big, but the cave over there, that's Finnegan's Cave. If you see the girl hanging over the side, not looking happy, right behind her is Finnegan's Cave. All right, Fingal, who's telling this story? Somebody's lunch,
Lagostino's.
Oh,
big shrimp.
big trip.
So that boat took off anyway to Fingal's Cave too.
Oh, it did, because if they didn't bring us to Staffa, they would have had to reimburse that portion of the trip. The fact that the waves were breaking over the pier they were meant to land us on didn't stop them. And so they slowed down to show us Fingal's Cave, where apparently the acoustics are phenomenal inside. And the boat did a huge lurch towards the rocks. We got out of there so fast. And they were issuing seasick bags that were clear plastic. I nearly died.
And had we been able to land, theoretically we would have been able to climb to the top of the rock, on which were puffins, who were very friendly with people because they would scare away the seagulls. So they really liked people, so they would walk right up to them. We were disappointed to miss that, but would not have wanted to land there.
I think this is St. Columbine's Cathedral on Iona, which is the religious site, still in use. built in the 11th century. Again, they don't put roofs on a lot of their stuff.
And it's always been a tourist attraction. At one point, this was St. Brendan, St. Columba, yeah, Columba. He was so, and the Archbishop of Belfast led a raid to stop all the tourism in the 1800s. The Book of Kells was written here, and they have a couple of old hotels. But what I loved about the hotels was not only did they serve high tea, we didn't have time to do that, but they had the most fabulous gardens with artichokes and like long established plants, raspberry canes, all caged in fish netting. It was just because it was just too hard to reliably land fresh produce.
What's his genius?
I think Diana, Lady Spencer, Princess Diana's mom used to own that at one stage.
Every little fire pot needed a second thing on it.
Happy Noel.
And the whiskey shop, so a friend of mine wanted me to bring back of all the whiskey we couldn't find here in Canada or in Toronto, so we went into the whiskey shop and asked for one, and the guy said, no, don't have it. We tried the whiskey shop down the street, no, didn't have it. Another guy says, just go over to the ferry dock. They said they got in, it's a tourist shop. Says they'll probably have it. And sure enough, you know, you could buy your fridge magnet or a bottle of Knock and Do Scotch there, which you couldn't buy anybody else. But we did that, and it's not working.
Yeah, we're back to
Anyway.
I'll talk you things. So when we got off the ferry from the trip from Oban across to Mull, drive the bus for an hour, Iona, Staffa, back again, it was spilling rain. And the next day, these guys were doing, participating in the tattoo in Tobermory, in the Highland Games in Tobermory. So this is the local high school band. It was great, and it didn't matter. They all had to meet in the town square and practice because it was the last practice they were going to have. And I had a fun time looking because they were all wearing their dad's shoes. As long as you had black flat shoes, you were grand.
Fair.
But they were good.
Well, it was lashing down rain on it.
And this is the castle at Dunstaffnage that was built on a volcanic plug. So this is all volcanic, hence the basalt. But that was a volcanic plug, and with the wind and erosion, the hill's gone down. And you'll see that featured in other castles. They make very good use of it. Edinburgh and Stirling Castle, there's...
But they have a problem where they put the fireplaces.
Oh, and this was
This is Dunstaff.
Dunstaffnage Marina, and the Sea Cadets operate out of here, and they have fabulous boats. There's one, and we got chatting with some of the Sea Cadets because one of them put wet clothes in a green garbage bag.
That's their other boat, so they can learn to sail or run powerboats. 3
of these boats will go out and anchor in all these beautiful parts of the world, and they're based in Dunstaffnage, and it works out fabulously.
And Princess Anne is the patron saint of the, she pays for all these boats.
She does a lot of the sponsorship of the boats. The Royal Navy does a lot of the staffing of the boats, and then there's 1 or 2 cadet leaders. And this was another day in paradise where we got on one of those day trip hop on, hop off to go out to the slate quarries. And just the front half of the upper deck had a roof. And every time we went downhill, there was a waterfall down the stairs. It was great. And this is the slate quarries that one very bad storm, everybody was instantly out of work because they flooded. All the housing was fine, there was no loss of life, just your vocation had to change.
If you've ever watched Coast on the TV, this was one of the sites that they went to.
Oh.
And it was a hurricane, and it blew through the wall in the quarry and then flooded it, and overnight 300 people were overworked. We're left there now. We're sailing north up in the
Between Mull and Skye. I forgot the name. The
Sound of Mull. And we went up into a place called Drent.
Funny name.
Into Drambuie. And then we left there and went up to a place that they call Loch Mortar, which was about 60 miles for us, and it was 50 miles from Malay. But to get into it, the only time you can go in is on a rising tide or at high tide, because the whole thing dries out.
There's the castle.
Went up and we were anchored in one anchorage with that. We got a hook down, and when the tide turned, we were in the middle of a whirlpool, which made things interesting. We didn't move except around the circle.
Well, we had macrame with our tripwire.
But it was kind of a neat spot, because when the tide went out, you didn't have to get your hands wet getting your mussels. You just walked up to the rocks and picked the ones you want.
Yes, but it was really soft mud, and of course Skipper lets his crew out first.
You know that black mud where you stand in it, you just keep going down?
Oh.
And you lose boots and...
That's not mud, it's ooze.
Yeah. And then we had one of the other nice days, and we were able to get up to the castle. Somebody previous to us had busted the lock on the gate to keep everybody out, so of course we went inside. But nobody would go up into the ruins and the walls, because there was a sign saying that rocks might fall on your head. So, but you can see there with the tide, low tide, and we couldn't go out at all because there's only about 2 feet of water all the way through there. That's kind of the inside of the castle. This one was ruined. The guy had owned it. I think when the English came up there, he wasn't going to give it to them, so he just burned it himself. And I told the 2 girls to go fly a kite. They did.
You mean they do what you tell them?
No. Not often. Tobermory. Another nice day. That particular moment, it wasn't raining. We left Tobermory and went down. We went back to Oban and then went further south and stayed. This was on the island of Jura in a place called Lowland Man's Bay. Nice anchorage. And there's a peninsula between there and the town, and on it there's 2 graves there that you can see, or tombs, and there was 2 more there that hadn't been opened. The one on the right, of course, you can see the trees growing out of it. I don't know if they're Viking or Neolithic. Oops. Cross back over to Gia again. This is at the north end of Gia, the nice little anchorage. While we're there, this gaffer came in behind us, dragging his anchor off his bow, and sailed into the anchorage. When the anchor hook spun around, he let it a little bit more roll, took off his mizzen sail, and sat there all night. So. and then sailed the anchor out the next day.
Easy way to do it.
Mm-hmm. So we left there, went over to Port Allen on Islay, which is the Scotch capital of the world apparently, where they make a lot of it. And there's 8 distilleries on a poster, and then there was 13 that we went to, and they all had free samples.
We got really good advice on from a boat called Orlando that sailed out of Belfast. He said rent a car, and we did, and we managed to get all around because Islay is quite a big island, and it's very different on the north part to the south part, and so consequently we got a lot of whiskey in. And then we went by ferry over to Keep Lickin.
They're just making a new batch of whiskey here.
Then we checked out the cost of renting bicycles if we went by ferry to Colonsay, and it was cheaper to bring the car.
Now you can order and buy a barrel of whiskey, and they'll keep it for however long you want. And this was in a sherry cask, and the color changes in the sherry to a red, and you lose about 1/3 of it while it's in the barrel. And we did them all. And you know they weren't cheap on their free samples. If you want to try an 18 or 20-year-old, they'd pour it for you. But what we found is we bought some whiskey and gin there, brought it home, and it was almost supposed to. The gin was they were only making 1,000 liters. You could only buy it in Islay and no place else, and the Scotch was the same. And we got home walking in Blue River Village, and there it is sitting in the liquor store. And it was about $30 a bottle cheaper to buy it in Canada than it was to buy it right at the distillery. So,
That was a hell of an adventure.
oh, it was an adventure, yeah. We took a drive around Colonsay and the road hazards.
Motivated with the rental car.
Another one of those standing stones in the middle of nowhere. No. And then we came back. We're back in Northern Ireland now, and Don and David not done a Game of Thrones cache, so we rented a car and went for a drive on the Western Highway, and that's the rope bridge between the one rock and the other one. Yeah, and that's looking out towards the island of Islay, and that's
Rockland Island, but that's more across the northern part.
okay.
That's how close Northern Ireland is to Mulligan, to whatever Kintyre has on it. Okay.
Now, the little, here, just point at it. The little person in the middle of that crowd wearing the polka dot dress is the Lord High Mayor of Belfast. 24 years old, and she runs the big city. And I asked one of the security guards, who is she? Because she's wearing a big train of officers. And he said, what do you mean who she is? I said, who is she? Well, okay, you're obviously not here. It tells me the story about Lord High Mayor. So. We've now run down the Irish coast, the Arklow Harbour. And it's a good spot to tie your boat up if you want to clean the bottom, because there was no copper mine, and the copper comes through, cleans everything else. And Arklow had one of the biggest munition plants, explosive plants in the world during the First World War. It stretched for 7 kilometers. And this is one of the tunnels to go from building to building. And it had schools for all the employees, hospitals, doctors, and now we're sailing again on a sunny day. Came around, we got weathered into Arklow for 5 days because of storms. We had 1 day to get down around the corner to Kilmore Key. We managed to do that. We're stuck in Kilmore Key for another gale for 4 days. We got a break to get across the 15 miles to Dunmore east. And once we were there, it was easy for us to come up to up the river and back to the boatyard. And that was a memorial to the lost sailors. So that's the two boys who own the boatyard. Sally's sister Heather painted the picture and of a scene in the boatyard and presenting it to Michael and Stephen.
And that's now Diane's.
And now it's Diane's turn.
That your sister that.
Yes. Okay, now, Diane's turn.
Okay.
Okay.
We have lunch. Thank you, Noel and Sally. I left them at Dunstaffage, so I didn't know about the rest of the trip. It looked really interesting. And you always have such good anecdotes and such a good sense of humor. All right, maybe I can just tell you a little bit of my background. Some of you may know I've been an educator for 30 years. I'm retired now. I do this wonderful gig with Shellbacks. I also volunteer in a school teaching meditation to grade 5s and grade 1s. I started sailing in 1974 with my husband, who had not got a boat at the time that we got married. And I took a sailing course through the Ontario Sailing Association. At the same time that I was taking the course, Roger had his nephew staying. So I would go for my 3 hours of lesson and then come home to 2 hours of review. So the second week, when we had races, we had 4 races, and our little boat won 2 and came in second in 2. I was hooked. Roger was going, yay! And we went and bought a boat in the fall. And so I haven't done a lot of racing, but have done a lot of cruising, including in the Caribbean, and then had the privilege of being with Sally and Noel. I think this is the 4th time. The 4th time. And so I left them in Dunstaffage, and I'm taking you back to Gia because there were parts of Gia that they didn't talk about, and the flowers. Here's a map of the island, and you can see Acamore Gardens, and that's basically, Sally talked about how this island was purchased by the locals, and it was purchased by the locals and it's run by the locals. And now, if you just look at these pictures, these are a painting and Gia from the ferry and the mooring where we were. And there was a yurt right across the street from those little booths that you saw with the flowers in them, and you could actually rent that yurt. The bay is called Ardminish Bay, and we were moored in that bay. And just to the right is the boathouse where we had that lovely dinner. And I'm sorry I'm repeating pictures here, but this is the pointing finger stone. And we have Tony and Ann and Noel and Dawn and Dave and Sally. And just a little sample of the vegetation on the island, and also a lovely little cottage. And there were a lot of little homes like this that were well maintained and very inviting and I think you can rent places on that island if you were so inclined. And here's one of those Oban stones, standing stone. And if you look on the right of the middle stone and on the right of the right one, you can see the runes on there. I wish we could understand what they said. And in the background, you've got the bay where we have our boat moored. And from that rune, from that Oban stone, we were looking down on a cemetery with Commonwealth war graves, and gorse in the foreground. Gorse is a kind of fern that is indigenous there, but it's also invasive, and they do a lot of work trying to keep it under control. And here we have the Acamore Gardens, and on the left, peacocks, which lived in the garden, and Sally is standing on one of the leaves of one of the vegetable, or the plants there. It was humongous, and they stood higher than she, as you can see. Some of the gardens in the park were informal, and other parts of it were formal. The top right-hand corner is formal. The actual gardens are the only place on the island that is still owned by the original laird, but he is currently in the process of trying to sell the house. And so we've got common flowers here, rhododendrons, red, white, and there is the house that is for sale. So if anybody is interested in a lovely mansion in the middle of a beautiful garden, just look it up and you can buy it. The community buyout happened in March of 2002, and they paid about $4 million to purchase it. And one of the ways that they are surviving with that, it's now a trust, I believe, is they have 4 wind generators on the island, and I believe they sell, well, they pay for and they generate power, obviously. And here's a lovely picture of Noel as we're leaving Gia. Good skipper, and I will reinforce how, what good sailors these two are. And here is what I did after I left them. I went from Oban and up to Maleg, which is the top of the blue line there, and then I trained it down to Glasgow and across to Edinburgh. I spent one night in Glasgow.
I think the first thing she said, though, once we left was, "Man, am I glad that's over."
Oh, shucks, I didn't think you heard me. Anyway, I had lunch overlooking the harbor in Maleg, which was a pretty little place. And I had Colleen skink soup, which is a specialty of Moray, Scotland, with Finn and Hattie, potatoes and onions. It was delicious. It was a perfect day to be sitting outside, reading a book, and overlooking that harbor. And in Maleg was the Potter train, the Harry Potter train, the, what's it called, I forget.
Hogwarts Express.
Hogwarts Express, but they don't call it that there. And the station out of which it runs is Glenfinnan, the Glenfinnan Viaduct. Glenfinnan is a town, and that's the viaduct of Harry Potter fame. And below I pulled a picture from the internet with the train on it. And you actually can ride that train. You can buy a ticket and take the train from Maleg down to Oban, I guess, and back. But I didn't. I took a regular train. It was a little less expensive. In Glasgow, I went to the Mungo Museum of Religious Life and Art. It was fascinating. And you've got the museum there just to the left of the top picture. And behind it is the Glasgow Cathedral. And inside is just one picture of what they have in that museum. It was very interesting because it was non-partisan, if you will, and it gave you a pretty clear picture of just about all the major religions. And so some of the comments on the left there were left by people who saw it. I thought they were pretty powerful. And behind the museum, between it and the cathedral, is a Japanese Zen garden. And on the right there, with all those colorful tags on it, pieces of cloth, is a clootie tree.